The greatest wound in your life may not be what someone did to you, but the moment you believed you needed someone else to make you whole. Think about that for a moment. Not the betrayal, not the heartbreak, not the abandonment, but the quiet belief that your peace, your happiness, your worth, and your identity could only exist if someone else stayed beside you. What if that belief has been shaping every decision you've made without you even realizing it? What if the pain you carry today is not only the result of what happened to you, but also the result of waiting for someone else to repair what only you can heal? There comes a moment in every person's life when the noise fades. The phone stops ringing. The messages become fewer. The people you thought would stay forever slowly become memories. And suddenly, you are left with the one person you have been trying to avoid all along. You. For many people, that moment feels unbearable. Not because being alone is frightening, but because silence has a way of revealing truths that distractions have kept hidden for years. It reveals the dreams you abandoned to make others comfortable. It reveals the fears you buried beneath constant busyness. It reveals the parts of your heart that have been quietly waiting for your attention while you searched for answers everywhere except within yourself. Perhaps you've spent years believing that if only the right person came into your life, everything would finally make sense. If only someone loved you enough. If only someone understood you completely. If only someone never left. Then the emptiness would disappear. Then the anxiety would fade. Then your heart would finally rest. But what if you've been asking another human being to carry a responsibility that was never meant to belong to them? No one, not even the people who love you most, can permanently silence the doubts you refuse to confront within yourself. No one can wake up every morning and choose your confidence for you. No one can breathe courage into your soul if you keep holding your own breath every time life becomes difficult. The search for healing often begins in the wrong direction. We search through relationships. We search through achievements. We search through applause, success, possessions, and constant validation. We tell ourselves that one more accomplishment will finally make us feel enough. One more compliment, one more relationship, one more chance. Yet somehow, even after reaching those milestones, a quiet emptiness remains. Why? Because external victories can never replace inner peace. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. You can receive endless praise and still believe you are not enough. You can be deeply loved and still struggle to love yourself. That is the paradox so many people spend their entire lives trying to escape. The world teaches us to seek more attention, more approval, more certainty. But life has a strange way of reminding us that the answers we desperately chase outside ourselves often begin in the places we've been afraid to look. Within our own hearts, within our own wounds, within the quiet conversations we avoid whenever the room becomes silent. Maybe you've convinced yourself that your past defines your future. Maybe someone once told you that you were too weak, too broken, too different, or too difficult to be loved. Perhaps those words stayed with you long after the people who spoke them disappeared. And without realizing it, you built your identity around voices that never truly knew your worth. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every day for years. After a while, the weight feels normal. You stop questioning whether it belongs to you. You simply learn to walk with the pain. Emotional wounds often work the same way. We become so familiar with self-doubt that we mistake it for reality. We become so accustomed to seeking permission from others that we forget we were born with our own inner compass. But what if the weight you've been carrying was never yours to keep? What if the fear you've accepted as part of your personality is simply an old wound asking to be healed? What if the version of yourself you've been waiting to become has been quietly waiting beneath layers of disappointment, fear, and borrowed expectations? This isn't about pretending pain never existed. It isn't about denying heartbreak or acting as though difficult experiences don't leave scars. Pain is real. Loss is real. Disappointment is real. But so is the remarkable strength hidden inside every human being. A strength that often remains invisible until everything familiar falls away. Sometimes life removes the people we depended on, not to punish us, but to introduce us to parts of ourselves we never would have discovered otherwise. The hardest seasons often become the birthplace of the deepest transformation, not because suffering is beautiful, but because it forces us to ask questions comfort never could. Who am I when no one is applauding me? Who am I when no one is rescuing me? Who am I when the only voice left to believe is my own? Those questions are uncomfortable, but they are also the beginning of freedom. So before you decide that this message isn't for you, before you convince yourself that you've already heard everything there is to know about healing, stay with me. Because what you're about to discover isn't another promise that someone else will save you. It's something far more powerful. It's the realization that the peace you've been searching for has never been locked behind another person's love, approval, or presence. It has been waiting patiently within you, beneath the fear, beneath the loneliness, and beneath every story that ever convinced you that you were incomplete. And once you truly understand that, you'll never look at yourself or your life the same way again. Most people believe that emotional dependence begins with love. It doesn't. It begins with fear. The fear of being abandoned. The fear of not being enough. The fear of being forgotten. These fears rarely announce themselves. They don't knock on the door and introduce themselves by name. Instead, they quietly disguise themselves as loyalty, devotion, sacrifice, or the desire to make relationships work at any cost. Over time, what feels like love slowly becomes something much heavier. It becomes a need. And the moment love becomes a need instead of a choice, freedom quietly begins to disappear. There is a question few people ever dare to ask themselves. If everyone you relied on suddenly disappeared tomorrow, who would you become? Would you still know your worth? Would you still believe in your dreams? Would you still recognize yourself? Or would your identity collapse because it had been built upon the opinions, attention, and approval of other people? Many spend their lives trying to avoid rejection. They shape their personalities to fit expectations. They silence their opinions to keep the peace. They apologize for things that require no apology. They become experts at reading the emotions of everyone around them while slowly forgetting how to understand their own. At first, these compromises seem harmless. You tell yourself you're simply being kind, you're being patient, you're being understanding. But little by little, each compromise asks you to leave another piece of yourself behind. One day you wake up and realize something unsettling. You know exactly what everyone else expects from you. But you no longer know what you truly want. This is one of the quietest prisons a person can enter. A prison without walls, without locks, without chains. And yet it can hold someone captive for an entire lifetime. The tragedy is that most prisoners never realize they are imprisoned. Because emotional dependence rarely feels like captivity. It feels familiar. It feels normal. It feels safe. Human beings naturally seek connection. We are not meant to live isolated lives. Relationships enrich us, inspire us, and remind us that we belong. But there is an important difference between sharing your life with someone and surrendering your life to someone. One creates partnership. The other creates dependence. Partnership allows both people to grow. Dependence silently demands that one person become responsible for another's happiness. That burden is impossible for anyone to carry. Imagine handing someone the keys to your home and saying, "You decide whether I feel safe." Now imagine handing them the keys to your heart and saying, "You decide whether I feel valuable." That is exactly what emotional dependence asks us to do. It places our peace into hands that were never meant to hold it. The difficult truth is that people change. Some leave, some disappoint us, some misunderstand us despite their best intentions. Some simply outgrow the role they once played in our lives. When your identity depends entirely on another person's presence, every change feels like the end of the world. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A disagreement becomes proof that you are unloved. A goodbye becomes evidence that you were never enough. Yet often these moments reveal less about reality and more about the fears already living inside us. Pain has a remarkable way of exposing what comfort keeps hidden. It reveals the places where our confidence depends upon applause. It reveals the places where our joy depends upon attention. It reveals the places where our sense of self has quietly been borrowed instead of built. There is a reason silence feels uncomfortable for so many people. Silence removes distractions. Without constant conversations, notifications, entertainment, or reassurance, we finally hear the thoughts we've been trying to outrun. Some discover a voice that whispers, "You'll never be enough." Others hear, "No one will stay." Others hear, "You need someone to complete you." These voices often sound convincing because they have been repeated for years. But repetition does not transform a lie into truth. A child who grows up constantly seeking approval often becomes an adult who mistakes approval for love. An adult who never learned to trust themselves begins asking everyone else to make their decisions. Slowly, confidence is replaced by permission. Instead of asking, "What feels true to me?" they begin asking, "What will make everyone else happy?" Instead of choosing authenticity, they choose acceptance. Instead of protecting their peace, they protect the comfort of others. The cost of this habit is enormous. Dreams remain unspoken. Talents remain hidden. Boundaries disappear. Resentment quietly grows. The person smiles on the outside while feeling increasingly invisible on the inside. Eventually, they begin blaming everyone else for the emptiness they feel. But the emptiness was never created because others failed to love them enough. It grew because they abandoned themselves in exchange for approval. Perhaps the hardest lesson in life is realizing that no relationship can heal a wound caused by losing yourself. Someone may encourage you. They may comfort you. They may stand beside you through your darkest days. Their love can be a beautiful gift, but it cannot replace the relationship you refuse to build with yourself. Think of a tree standing in a violent storm. If its roots are deep, the wind may bend its branches, but it will remain standing. If its roots are shallow, even a gentle storm can bring it down. People are much the same. When your roots grow into self-respect, self-awareness, and inner peace, relationships become blessings rather than lifelines. You appreciate love without becoming imprisoned by it. You welcome companionship without fearing solitude. You celebrate connection without losing yourself. This does not mean becoming cold or refusing to trust others. It does not mean pretending you need no one. True strength is not isolation. True strength is knowing that your value does not disappear simply because someone walks away. It is understanding that rejection cannot erase your worth. Silence cannot diminish your dignity. Distance cannot steal your identity. The strongest people are not those who never experience heartbreak. They are the ones who refuse to let heartbreak define who they are. Every ending becomes an invitation to know themselves more deeply. Every disappointment becomes an opportunity to strengthen what cannot be taken from them. When you stop asking others to tell you who you are, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your confidence no longer rises and falls with compliments. Your peace no longer depends upon constant reassurance. Your joy becomes quieter, steadier, and far more resilient. You begin making decisions based on conviction rather than fear. You stop chasing people who have already chosen to leave. You stop shrinking yourself to fit places you have outgrown. You stop confusing attention with affection and dependence with love. And perhaps, for the first time in your life, you discover that freedom is not found in controlling other people or persuading them to stay. Freedom is found in becoming someone who remains whole even when life changes. Because the moment you stop asking another person to carry the weight of your identity is the moment you begin carrying it with quiet strength yourself. That is where healing truly begins. Not when everyone chooses you, but when you finally choose yourself. There is a part of you that you rarely introduce to the world. It doesn't appear in your happiest photographs. It doesn't speak when people ask how you're doing. It hides behind polite smiles, forced confidence, endless distractions, and carefully chosen words. It stays in the background while the version of yourself you want others to see steps into the light. Yet no matter how hard you try to leave it behind, it follows you everywhere. It follows you into your relationships, into your ambitions, into your fears, into your successes, into every decision you make without fully understanding why. Most people spend their entire lives trying to escape this hidden part of themselves. They bury painful memories beneath busy schedules. They cover insecurity with achievement. They silence grief with entertainment. They replace self-reflection with constant activity because standing still feels too dangerous. But what if the very part of yourself you've spent years avoiding is the same part holding the key to your freedom? Imagine walking through an old house that has belonged to your family for generations. Every room is familiar except one. At the end of a long hallway stands a locked door. Everyone has always told you never to open it. They say nothing good is inside. So you pass by it every day, pretending it doesn't exist. Years go by. The house begins to feel heavier. The air grows colder. Strange sounds echo through the walls. You spend enormous amounts of energy trying to ignore what is behind that door. One day you realize something remarkable. The locked room has been influencing the entire house, even though you never entered it. The human mind works in much the same way. The emotions we refuse to face do not disappear. They simply find quieter ways to influence our lives. The anger you deny may become bitterness. The sadness you suppress may become emptiness. The fear you refuse to acknowledge may disguise itself as perfectionism. The loneliness you avoid may become desperate attachment. The shame you hide may quietly convince you that you will never be enough. We often imagine healing as the process of removing darkness from our lives. In reality, healing is often the process of walking into the darkness with enough courage to understand it. Every person carries wounds. Some are visible. Others are invisible even to those closest to them. A child criticized for every mistake may grow into an adult terrified of failure. Someone abandoned by people they trusted may spend years believing every relationship is temporary. Someone who was never heard may begin speaking less and less until silence becomes their identity. These experiences do not simply vanish with time. Time may soften the memory, but unexamined pain has a remarkable ability to shape the future. Many people mistake avoidance for healing. They tell themselves, "I've moved on. I don't think about it anymore. It doesn't affect me." But healing is not measured by how rarely you remember your pain. Healing is measured by how little power that pain still has over your choices. If the fear of rejection keeps you from loving openly, the wound is still speaking. If all criticism keeps you from pursuing your dreams, the wound is still leading your life. If betrayal has convinced you that no one can ever be trusted, the wound is still making your decisions. The hidden parts of ourselves are patient. They wait. They appear in unexpected moments. Sometimes during an argument that becomes far bigger than the situation deserves. Sometimes when a harmless comment suddenly feels deeply personal. Sometimes when success arrives, yet satisfaction never follows. Sometimes when everything in life seems fine, but an unexplained emptiness refuses to leave. These moments often confuse us. We ask, why did I react like that? Why can't I let this go? Why do I keep repeating the same mistakes? The answers rarely lie in the present moment alone. They often live in stories we never finish telling ourselves. The greatest mistake many people make is believing that uncomfortable emotions are enemies. They believe anger must be eliminated, fear must be hidden, sadness must be conquered. But emotions are not enemies, they are messengers. Imagine your body suddenly feeling intense pain. You would not become angry with the pain itself. You would understand that it is trying to tell you something requires attention. Emotional pain works in exactly the same way. It is not always trying to punish you. Sometimes it is trying to protect you. Sometimes it is asking you to notice what has been neglected for years. Sometimes it is inviting you to become honest about what you truly need. The challenge is that honesty requires courage. It is easier to blame others than to examine ourselves. It is easier to point at someone's flaws than to acknowledge our own fears. It is easier to remain busy than to sit quietly with difficult questions. But growth begins the moment excuses end. Ask yourself this: what emotion do you avoid most? Is it sadness? Because sadness reminds you of someone you lost. Is it anger? Because you were taught that expressing it made you unworthy of love. Is it fear? Because you've convinced yourself that strong people never admit they are afraid. Whatever emotion you avoid eventually begins controlling you from the shadows. The irony is almost heartbreaking. The very feelings we hide to appear stronger often become the reason we remain weak. Strength is not pretending to have no wounds. Strength is refusing to let your wounds remain strangers. There comes a moment when every person must choose between comfort and truth. Comfort says, keep pretending. Truth whispers, look closer. Comfort says, blame your circumstances. Truth asks, what part of yourself still needs compassion? Comfort says, run. Truth quietly says, stay. The journey inward is never easy. You may discover memories you buried long ago, words that still echo in your mind, moments that changed the way you saw yourself without your permission. You may realize that some of your greatest fears were never truly yours. Perhaps they were inherited from people who carried their own unresolved pain. Perhaps someone else's insecurity became your self-doubt. Someone else's anger became your fear. Someone else's silence became your loneliness. Recognizing this changes everything, because once you see where a belief came from, you no longer have to live as though it is your destiny. You begin separating your identity from your injuries. You stop saying, I am broken, and instead begin saying, I experienced something painful. Those two statements are worlds apart. One becomes a prison. The other becomes the beginning of freedom. Healing asks for something many people resist: compassion toward yourself. Not the kind that makes excuses, the kind that tells the truth without cruelty, the kind that says, you were hurt, but you are not beyond hope. You made mistakes, but you are capable of growth. You have scars, but scars are evidence that healing is possible. There is incredible power in meeting yourself with patience instead of judgment. The person who constantly criticizes themselves rarely becomes stronger. They simply become more afraid. Growth flourishes where understanding replaces shame. Imagine carrying a lantern through a dark forest. The purpose of the light is not to destroy the darkness. It is simply to help you see clearly enough to continue walking. Self-awareness works the same way. It does not erase your past overnight. It illuminates it. It helps you recognize patterns before they repeat. It teaches you why certain words hurt more than others, why certain people attract you, why certain fears return. The more clearly you see yourself, the less power your hidden wounds have over your future. Little by little, the parts of yourself you once feared begin transforming. Fear becomes wisdom. Pain becomes compassion. Failure becomes humility. Loneliness becomes self-discovery. Even grief begins to reveal unexpected strength. You stop fighting against every uncomfortable feeling and begin listening to what it came to teach. And something remarkable happens. You no longer spend your life running from yourself. You begin walking beside yourself, not as an enemy, not as a stranger, but as someone finally willing to understand every hidden corner of the soul. Because the deepest healing does not begin when your darkness disappears. It begins the moment you stop fearing it, step toward it with honesty, and discover that even your shadow has been waiting, not to destroy you, but to lead you back to the person you were always meant to become. There comes a season in every life when the world grows quieter than we ever expected. The conversations become fewer, the invitations slow down. The people we once leaned on become busy building lives of their own. At first, this silence feels like loss. It feels as though life has forgotten us. We wonder why no one is calling. We question our worth. We begin believing that being alone is proof that something is missing within us. But what if this quiet season is not a punishment? What if it is an invitation? Most people confuse solitude with loneliness, yet they are not the same. Loneliness is the painful feeling that something essential is absent. Solitude is the peaceful realization that everything essential has been within you all along. One drains your spirit, the other restores it. The difference has very little to do with whether other people are present. It has everything to do with the relationship you have with yourself. You can stand in the middle of a crowded room, surrounded by laughter and familiar faces, and still feel completely alone, because your heart is disconnected from itself. At the same time, you can sit quietly beneath an open sky with no one beside you and feel an extraordinary sense of peace, because for the first time in years, you are no longer running from your own thoughts. Many people fear silence because silence removes every distraction. There are no conversations to hide behind, no endless scrolling, no constant noise, no one else's opinions filling every empty space. There is only you, and that meeting can be uncomfortable. Questions begin to rise that have waited patiently beneath the surface for years. Who am I when no one expects anything from me? What dreams have I ignored simply because they did not fit someone else's expectations? What parts of myself have I sacrificed just to feel accepted? These questions rarely have easy answers, but they have honest ones. And honesty is where transformation begins. From the time we are young, we are taught to measure ourselves by the responses of others. Good grades earn praise. Success earns admiration. Popularity earns attention. Achievement earns approval. Slowly, without realizing it, we begin believing that our value exists only when someone else confirms it. Then one day, life removes the audience. The applause fades. The approval becomes uncertain. And suddenly we must answer a question we have avoided for years. Who are we without validation? For some, this question feels terrifying. For others, it becomes the beginning of freedom. Imagine a sculptor standing before a block of untouched stone. To everyone else, it appears ordinary, heavy, rough, unremarkable. But the sculptor sees something hidden inside. With every careful strike, pieces begin falling away. Not because the sculptor is destroying the stone, because the sculptor is revealing what was always there. Solitude works much the same way. It removes everything that does not truly belong to you. The expectations, the comparisons, the pressure to become someone else's idea of success. Little by little, what remains is not a new person. It is your authentic self, uncovered beneath years of borrowed identities. This process is rarely comfortable. Growth seldom is. There will be days when the silence feels overwhelming, days when old memories unexpectedly return, days when doubt whispers that you should go back to the familiar noise, because at least it distracts you from uncertainty. But every time you resist the urge to escape yourself, you grow a little stronger. Every quiet morning spent reflecting instead of reacting builds resilience. Every evening spent listening to your own thoughts instead of seeking constant reassurance deepens your understanding of who you are. The strongest roots are formed underground where no one can see them. Before a mighty tree reaches toward the sky, it spends years growing downward. Quietly, without applause, without recognition. People often admire the height of the tree while forgetting the invisible foundation that makes such height possible. Your inner life follows the same principle. The strength that carries you through heartbreak, disappointment, failure, and uncertainty is not built during moments of celebration. It is built in the unseen hours when no one is watching. When you choose reflection instead of distraction. When you choose growth instead of comfort. When you choose truth instead of pretending. There is remarkable wisdom hidden in learning to enjoy your own company. Not because you no longer appreciate relationships, but because you stop fearing their absence. You no longer chase people simply to escape being alone. You no longer tolerate disrespect because silence frightens you more than mistreatment. You no longer shrink your voice to keep everyone comfortable. Instead, your relationships become healthier because they are built upon choice rather than desperation. You begin loving people freely instead of clinging to them out of fear. You appreciate companionship without making it responsible for your happiness. You discover that genuine connection grows stronger when it comes from two whole people, rather than two people hoping the other will fill an invisible emptiness. There is also something extraordinary that happens to your intuition in solitude. The constant opinions of the world become quieter. You begin hearing your own inner wisdom again. Decisions become clearer. Your priorities become simpler. You stop asking what will impress everyone else, and you begin asking what brings peace to my soul. That single change can transform the direction of an entire life. Many of history's greatest ideas, works of art, discoveries, and moments of profound insight were born not in crowded rooms, but in moments of deep reflection. Silence has always been one of humanity's greatest teachers. It reveals what constant noise conceals. It shows you the difference between desire and purpose, between fear and intuition, between the life you inherited and the life you are meant to create. Eventually, something within you begins to change. The empty room no longer feels empty. The quiet evening no longer feels lonely. The walk taken without company becomes a conversation with your own heart. You stop waiting for someone else to tell you who you are, because you have begun discovering it for yourself. Your confidence no longer depends on attention. Your joy no longer requires constant approval. Your peace no longer disappears when plans change or people walk away. It rises from a place much deeper than circumstances. It comes from knowing that wherever life leads you, you will never truly be alone again. Because you have finally become a friend to the one person who has been with you since your very first breath. And once that friendship is built, the silence you once feared becomes the very place where your truest, strongest, and most authentic self quietly comes to life. One day you'll realize something extraordinary. The people who left, the disappointments, the heartbreak, none of them destroyed you. They introduced you to the strongest version of yourself. Carl Jung reminded us that becoming whole is not about finding someone who completes you. It is about discovering that you were never incomplete. The greatest relationship you will ever build is the one you have with your own soul. Because when you heal yourself, you stop begging for love. You stop fearing rejection. You stop chasing approval. And you begin living with a quiet confidence that no one can take away. Remember this: the strongest person isn't the one who never needed help. The strongest person is the one who learned to become their own source of peace. If that day becomes today, your healing has already begun.